Mr. Speaker, I listened to my colleague on the other side, Mr. Siraj. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that Mr. Siraj is yet to read the 2022 budget. Mr. Siraj went on to say, and I quote, this budget should have been named non-oil and gas budget. The first budget in this nation's history to utilize the revenues from the Natural Resource Fund, Mr. Siraj stood in this house and said, this budget, Mr. Siraj, honorable member, stood and said that it should have been named the non-oil and gas budget. Uncertainty, right? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Siraj further spoke about the price of planting. And again, I am convinced that Mr. Siraj has not gone to the market in a very honorable member, has not gone to the market in an extremely long time. The price of planting is not something that the coalition was speaking about. The price of planting was an issue that the nation was speaking about. Mr. Siraj also said, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition is in panic mode. Mr. Speaker, the opposition is not in panic mode. The nation is in panic mode. The vulnerable members of this country is in panic mode. The single parent is in panic mode. Everyone in Guyana that is not a part of that clique is in panic mode. That is the panic that we are experiencing in a nation today. Mr. Speaker, it was Mark Twain that said, never argue with stupid people. They will drag you down to their level and then they will beat you with experience. Mr. Hamilton has left the House, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Hamilton, honorable member. Oh, he's here? Mr. Hamilton, honorable member, took it upon himself to launch a personal attack on me in his presentation on Monday when he opened for the government side of the House in their debate. Sir, the most astonishing thing about Mr. Hamilton is, honorable member, is yet to be known. Sir, the records of great politicians that walk these lands knows not the name of Joe Hamilton, honorable member. It is unbelievable, sir, that someone that spent decades in politics find it fitting to come to this house and his presentation for a budget, sir, he see it fitting to make sure that he launched an attack on a young female parliamentarian. Must I enlighten this house, dear sir, and enlighten Mr. Hamilton, sir, the decade-old politician in the House, that my political career started a mere 5 years ago. And the latter part of that 5 years, sir, I've been sitting as a member in the National Assembly. Sir, you found it fitting to insult me because you said, you believe, rather, let me quote him, he said he thought about it all night, that I am tasked with shadowing Dr. Ashley Singh. He thought about it all night, sir. I didn't say that, he did. Mr. Speaker, I am not surprised, and rightly so, he thought about it all night, sir. Because it is in those quiet moments that you, Mr. Joseph Hamilton, honorable member, it is in those quiet moments when you do not have your colleagues to prop you up. It is in those moments that you reflect on the political failure that you are. Miserable, incompetent, sorry excuse of a politician, sir. Mr. Speaker, In my last budget presentation, sir, when speaking to the non-oil GDP, I quoted, sir, was the APNUAFC's accomplishment in building a strong economy in 2019 so overwhelming that it will take the PPP until 2023, 3 years in office, as the Caribbean's largest oil producer, to finally match the economic output of the APNUAFC's final year in office? Sorry, that was a direct quote from my presentation in 2021. Sir, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, responded, and he said, sir, that I did not know what I was talking about. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the said minister stood right here in this very house last Wednesday and delivered a report card to this nation that not only confirmed what I said, sir, but he delivered a report card of total and utter failure to the people of this nation. The minister reported, sir, that in 2021, non-oil GDP growth was an anemic 4.6%. After a projection that the said minister made in this very house, sir, of 6.1% in 2021. After, sir, that had suffered a contraction of 7.3% in 2020, sir. And further, sir, Mr. Speaker, the minister gave the projection for 2022 as 7.7%. And again, I project an epic failure to meet the target for this year as well. For the member that is shouting, due to his ignorance to the matter at hand, let me explain further, sir. The Honorable Mr. Kwame McCoy that is shouting, I am simply saying, sir, I'm going to take the time to explain it to you. You met the economy here. In 2020, it contracted, it went down here, sir. 7.3 contraction. You projected, sir, your government, sir, projected that in 2021 it would have had a growth of 6.1, sir. They did not meet that target, sir. They met a target of 4.6, sir. You think you're following, sir? That is what is going on. Mr. Speaker, we have witnessed the PPP miss 2 GDP growth targets in 2 budgets, sir. Not only have they missed every growth target since they came into office, sir, but they missed both by miles. They have missed every growth target and they have missed those targets by miles, sir. In 2020, the Honorable Minister projected, like I said, the GDP would contract between 1.4% and 4.3%. Then, when presenting in 2021 budget, he reported that the economy actually contracted by 7.3%, sir. With that failure on his record, he then projected GDP growth of 6.1 in 2021, sir. 6.1, that is what he projected, sir. Sir, with this failure on his record, sir, I think 6.1% was a very modest sum, which fully took into account the COVID-19 pandemic, I dare add. The PPP is coming to this house, speaker after speaker, and speaking about their failure and trying to sugarcoat it and trying to blame the COVID pandemic. So I want to remind this house that the COVID pandemic was already upon us when those projections were made at the beginning of 2021. So that is not an excuse for the drastic failures that was reported here, sir. Modest as it might have been, sir, modest as it might have been, it was clearly not modest enough to overcome the legendary incompetence of the PPP. The Honorable Minister came to this house just last week to report that instead of the 6.1 projected growth, Guyana has recorded a GDP growth rate of only 4.6. With another significant failure on his record, he then proceeded, like I said, sir, that the ending of this year, he is going to realize a non-oil GDP growth of 7.7%. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm willing to take any bet that the PPP is going for the hat trick with 3 failed GDP growth targets in a row, sir. Let us all assume, for the sake of argument, let us assume, sir, that somehow they will get their act together and finally deliver on a promise, just one promise, sir. Let's say the economy actually grew by 7.7% in 2022, non-oil economy I refer to, sir. As unlikely as it is, sir, that would amount to an average GDP growth of 1.47% over the 3 budget executed by the PPP. These are the people who attempt to lecture to us. Then they come to this house and they speak of transformation. They come to this house and they say they know to do it best. This is what they have delivered. Failure upon failure. Let's talk about inflation, sir. Big topic at hand right now. Every media house is reporting on inflation. The people of this country is crying out about inflation. As I turn the nation's attention to another target that the PPP has totally failed to meet, they have a trend of missing targets since they came back in office, sir. In his 2021 budget presentation, the Honorable Minister within the Ministry of the Presidency with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashney Singh, projected that there would be a 1.6% inflation in 2021, sir. He then came back to this house, the Honorable Member, and reported a 5.7% inflation rate for 2021. Mr. Speaker, 5.7% is over 3.5 times his announced target. And the projection was made in light of COVID-19. COVID-19 is not an excuse for this failure to meet this target. I pause and wonder how a government could be so utterly incapable of hitting a single one of their targets. Targets that they set, sir. This is not targets that the opposition set. The opposition didn't set targets. They set targets. They said based on their competence, they will make these things happen. Failure, failure, failure. This is all that they have delivered to this nation, sir. Mr. Speaker, when this budgetary period ends, at the end of 2022, the PPP would have presided over a total inflation rate of over 11% in just 2.5 years. This is taken into account, sir, the projection from the Honorable Dr. Ashney Singh. A cost of living increase, sir, of $11,000 on $100,000 budget, sir. Where is the average worker and pensioner going to find the money to meet this spike in the cost of living? In the budget, sir, the biggest budget ever, a budget that drains the NRF fund, the pensioners will receive an increase of $3,000. This is a relief that this uncaring administration offers, when by their own projection, sir, they would have presided over an inflation of 11% since they assumed office. They are now giving the pensioners $3,000, sir. And these are the people that want to scold us on management of the economy. What a joke. Their own report, sir, reeks of economic mismanagement. So let's turn our attention to corruption. The PPP loves to speak about corruption. My friend Yvonne, yes. My friend Yvonne was very honorable member, Miss Yvonne. She spoke about the numbers don't lie. So let's go to corruption. Mr. Speaker, the 2019 CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, sir, stated, and I quote, 2019, sir, With a score of 40, Guyana is a significant improver on the CPI since 2012. 2012, sorry, just for the reminder, the PP was in office in 2012. While there is still much work to do, the government has demonstrated political will to hold former politicians accountable for the misuse of state resources. That was reported under the APN UAFC administration, sir. Not only did that statement acknowledge the misuse of state resources under the PPP, but it went on to show how the policies of the APN UAFC was geared at correcting systems they met in place to rid the nation coffers, sir. The PPP come to this house, sir, and talk about corruption. What a joke. What a joke. In 2012, sir, under the PPP, Guyana had the highest ranking in corruption ever in this nation history, sir. Under the PPP, they presided over that, sir. However, sir, the PPP wasted no time after they assumed office in 2020, sir, to set backup system to raid the nation's coffers. In 2021, sir, the corruption perception index now was forced to drop Guyana's ranking by 2, sir. We are 2 rankings worse off than they took this country in 2020, sir. And they want to speak about corruption? What a joke. What a joke. Let's meet. This is the budget, sir. I know you don't understand that, but this is the budget, sir. Taxation, sir. Taxation, sir. Mr. Speaker, one of the most boosted tax adjustment in the 2022 budget is the removal of the 2% withholding tax on resident contractors, sir. It's right here, page 5, in their little abstract, sir. Number 1D, remove the 2% withholding tax on resident contractors, sir. But, Mr. Speaker, we are only left to assume. Sir, we are only left to assume that this tax reduction is simply a redirection of those funds from the coffers at GRA and into the pockets of the gang that is raiding the nation coffers, sir. And sir, we have evidence of this, sir. Sir, we have evidence of this, sir. The honorable member, as I must refer to him, sir, Mr. Kwame McCoy, shouting across, how is this possible, sir? I will remind the honorable member, Mr. McCoy, I don't think he follows the news, sir, that it is their PS that a sting operation was set up against. It's their PSs before the court for what? You remember what? Corruption, sir. Corruption, sir. Yet the PPP comes to this house and they try to scold us on management. Sir, speaker after speaker, the PPP have come to this house, sir, and they have talked about track record. What did you do? That's what they said. What did you do when you were in office? Each and every member of the PPP. Mr. Speaker, we have listened to all of them from the government side stand up and speak on track records. And we have heard them, and we have heard them ask the question, what did you do? And I stand here to remind those on the other side, with their shallow memory, sir, of our track record. And more importantly, to enlighten them, sir, of their own track record since assuming office in 2020. Because it is clear, sir, that they were partly deaf. I believe they were partly deaf, sir, when the honorable member, Dr. Ashni Singh, was actually delivering his presentation, sir. The honorable member stood in this very house last Wednesday and delivered his report card to this nation. Let's talk about track record. Don't get distracted, sir. He delivered a report card that he repeatedly was forced to grade his administration and his ministers in the various sectors and ministries. F, F, F. Failure, 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 sir. We can look at the very presentation, sir, starting from page 7. This is the document that was read by the Honorable Minister within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. He spoke to sectorial performance, sir. This is developments in the domestic economy in 2021. This is not the coalition going out there and saying that they failed, sir. This is them reporting the numbers of failure. The Minister of Finance reported an F in agriculture, forestry, and fishing sector. He said, Mr. Speaker, that sector contracted by 9.1% in 2021. Not grow, sir. This comes after he had estimated the sector to expand by 5.6% in his previous budget presentation. Simply put, sir, he came here at the beginning of 2021 and he said that they are good and they are competent and they can deliver and they're going to use the resources well. And he said at the end of 2021, this sector would have grown by 5.6%. Sir, his report card said that it contracted by 9.1%, sir. The minister went on to say that the sugar growing subsector had reduced by 34.7% in 2021 and delivered a total sugar production, sir, of 58,025 tons, sir. Simply put, in 2020, sir, this subsector produced 87,875 tons. Mr. Speaker, it is after the minister stood in this house last year and I said, and I want to quote him here, sir, the restructuring of Gaisuko, because they came, sir, and they spoke about Gaisuko. I think it was every speaker that spoke about Gaisuko, if I'm not mistaken. They came to this house, sir, and they spoke about Gaisuko. And I'm quoting from the minister 2021 budget presentation, sir. He said the restructuring of Gaisuko alongside the recapitalization of sugar estate will see improved production and productivity, not only in 2021, but over the medium term. As a result, in 2021, the sugar industry is projected to grow by 9.6%, end of quote, sir. He is now trying, sir. He is here and he is trying to blame the failure to reach this target on the flood. But sir, even that, sir, if you were to calculate by his own admission, the numbers that he projected within this very report, sir, if you are to do the calculations as to the loss that they ensued due to the flood, Mr. Speaker, you would realize, sir, that even if you subtract from that number that they projected, sir, they would have still fallen short tremendously. But you know what is most astonishing, sir? And persons need to understand this. Even with the worst projections that we have encountered thus far, even with their failure to meet any one of these targets thus far, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member proceeded to give a projection for 2022 for this subsector as 65,000 tons. I want Guyanese to understand what we're saying. The PPP come to this house, speaker after speaker, and they say they will rescue sugar. They came to this house and they say that we did not know what we were doing when we were in office. They came to this house and they say that they will reopen the sugar estates. Sir, the PPP is now by their own admission, sir. The PPP is now by their own admission. It is a bare-faced admittance, sir, that they know that sugar is failing. These are the people that stand in this house to lecture us 2-3 budgets later is yet to bring up production of sugar to where we left it off in 2019, sir. Sir, no estates will be open. Mark my word. Absolutely no estates will be open. And tens of thousands of jobs, the tens of thousands of jobs. I want to touch on Mr. Mustafa. He's not here, sir. I will still continue. Mr. Mustafa stood in this house, sir, yesterday, and he said when they're finished with the work, they will be creating avenues for tens of thousands of jobs. Tens of thousands of jobs, you know. Mr. Speaker, it should be a crime for a sitting minister to randomly pull numbers out of the sky like that. Just to inform this honorable house, the unemployment rate, these are the numbers, the unemployment rate for the third quarter of 2021 was reported by the Bureau of Statistics at 14.5% in comparison to the 13.1% in 2019. Simply put, more persons were employed under the coalition that are employed today. The APN, UAFC did not talk. We delivered. We employed more persons. That is what the number said by the Bureau of Statistics. You can go and challenge that if you will, sir. Mr. Speaker, I repeat to further make it clear. It is a statistical fact, sir, proven by the hard work of the Guyana Bureau of Statistics that there are more people jobless today, unemployed today, than there were under the APN, AFC administration time in office. This is the cold, hard fact beyond debate, sir. Those are the numbers, Mr. Pearson. As you rightly said, numbers don't lie. Mr. Speaker, the minister continued. The minister continued to read his failed report card that the PPP got an F in rice production also, sir. According to his report, sir, this is his report, there was a reduction of 20.5%, resulting in 860,000 tons of paddy production in the rice growing sector for 2021, sir. This was after the minister stood in this house and projected production to increase by 3.5%, another missed target, sir. The PPP continues to miss their targets. And let me remind this nation, sir, that it was under the APN UAFC administration that paddy production was at its two highest, with 2015 being the highest and 2019 being the second highest, both years recording well over 1 million tons of paddy, sir. We do not need you to lecture us on the rice sector, sir. We have delivered. This is a track record. You asked for a track record, I'm delivering that track record to you. Let's look at the extractive industry, sir. Let's look at the extractive industry, sir. Mr. Speaker, the report card for the extractive industry is another F. Another F, sir. Bauxite mining declined by 3.8%. F. Gold mining contracted by 14.8%. F. With the combined output from large operators declining by 31.7%, sir. F, F, F. And let me remind this nation that under, sir, since we're talking about track record again, sir, let me remind this nation of the track record for the extractive industry under the APN UAFC administration, sir. 2014, sir, the last year of the PPP being in office. 2014, sir. 2014, sir. Gold declaration was 387,000 ounces. Mark this number, listen carefully. 387,000 ounces, 2014. The coalition came into office in 2015. Guyanese, you're listening. The first year of the APN UAFC in office, gold declaration, sir, was 451,000 ounces. 16.5% increase, sir. That's our first year in office, sir. Let's move to our second year in office, sir. 2016. 2016, sir. May I continue?
Thanks, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you will need some time to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you may continue to conclude.
Thank you, sir. Let me recap it for persons that missed that. PPP left the office in 2014, their last year in office, rather, in 2014. We had the declaration of gold being 387,000 ounces. The coalition came into office in 2015. We had the declaration of gold, 451,000 ounces, 16.5% increase. Sir, 2016, the second year of the APN UAFC being in office, 713,000 ounces, 58% increase, and they try to school us on extractive industry. What a joke. A mere 2 years of being in office, the APN UAFC had an increase, sir, of 326,000 ounces. That, my friends, account for almost 85% increase. So do not attempt to lecture us on gold. Mr. Hamilton don't understand, sorry, Honorable Member, Mr. Hamilton, and we know why. Mr. Speaker, the report card as delivered by the Honorable Member, Dr. Ashni Singh, is a dismal report of failure. A report card that fails to reach any target that was set by their own administration, not by us, sir. A report card of failure presented to this nation. And yet, sir, they come to this house and shout and scream with their incompetence. Empty barrels, indeed, make the most noises. This budget rips through the very soul of this nation, a nation that was hopeful. This hope is now lost. The abomination, sir, which the PPP calls a budget, lays out a plan to add a further debt burden, sir, of $100 billion while emptying the natural resource funds of $126 billion, sir. Mr. Speaker, let me put that into context for my friend that need me to put it into further context for him. The PPP has outlined, sir, a plan to place a debt burden of $476,000 on the shoulder of every Guyanese family, while they also withdraw $600,000 per family that was saved in the NRF fund, sir. I know you didn't do that calculation, sir. Sir, $1,076,000 per every Guyanese family. $90,000 a month per every Guyanese family, sir. That is what the PPP has done to this nation. This, sir, is more than enough to immediately end extreme poverty in Guyana and make hunger and homelessness, sir, a distant memory for the thousands of Guyanese who are struggling in the depth of extreme poverty in this nation, sir. Yet you can search until the end of this budget period, sir. Sir, you can search forever and you will not find a single policy within this budget that actually address extreme poverty. This is the budget that the PPP come to this house and claim to be a caring budget. This budget, the biggest budget ever, $552.9 billion. The first budget to use the oil revenues after it would have been fully implemented at the end of this year. There is still absolutely no relief for the poor. There will still be a plastic city, sir, in Region 3, their stronghold. There will still be families struggling in Tiger Bay, sir. There will still be children begging on the streets. There will still be homeless people sleeping on every road corner in this city. After the biggest budget ever, listen carefully, the first budget to utilize our oil revenues, Guyanese will still be struggling to survive. Poverty, the lack of basic human needs will continue to plague our most vulnerable under this careless, heartless, immoral, and inhumane budget. single mothers struggling to provide for their families, sir. Pensioners who are no longer able to work, the sick and the disabled. These are these people who make up the bulk of those who will suffer in extreme poverty in this country. This budget does absolutely nothing to raise their standard of living. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is not too much to ask that in a country set to have the third highest oil production ever, per person, when the Liza Unity comes online in just a few weeks, this 2022 budget should have outlined a plan to end childhood hunger. At the very least, sir, is it too much to ask that there be a plan to get thousands of children living in squatting areas, provide them with emergency housing, sir? Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask that our pensioners be given enough money in the biggest budget ever, the first budget to utilize the NRF funds? Is it too much to ask that you give them enough money so that they can afford 3 healthy meals a day? For the PPP, sir, this is too much to ask. For the government of the day, it is least among their concerns, sir. Sir, they are more concerned with projects and programs that will yield the biggest kickbacks. Sir, as I wrap up, how do we expect a minister who traveled via bus for the first time when he was 30 years old and he had to take a camera crew, sir, to film his experience? How do we expect him to understand the needs of persons? How do we expect him to understand poverty? How do we expect him to understand that $3,000 addition after draining the nation's oil resources is nothing close to being enough for our pensioners? How do we expect him to understand that, sir? Mr. Speaker, the PPP seems to be filled with two extremes. On one hand, they have people that do not care. And on the other hand, sir, they have people that do not understand. So what we have, sir, is a situation in which persons that do not care is actually leading persons that do not understand. That is what is going on there, sir. Sir, I will say in my final statement, sir.
Honorable member, I will have to stop the final statement because I've been signaling you for the past 3 minutes to conclude. I'll give you 30 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Much obliged. Sir, in my final statement, I would say that if I was to name this budget for the PPP, an accurate name for the budget would have been trickle-down economics again. We promise it will work for you this time. Thank you, sir.